Time to start cutting these things up. Gonna start with the long pieces first. The top and bottom long rails, and then the posts, the top rails on the ends, the dividers. Got a list, plans are complete, it's showtime. The 4 long rails are cut to length. And before I take another step, I'm gonna label these things on the ends, because one of the biggest problems I had building the beta bench was just keeping track of which piece went where as the pieces were increasingly milled. So I think I've got a better sort of a cataloging system. I'm going to be as careful as I can be to put marks on the ends, on the parts of the boards that are not going to be sanded or cut away, in order to be able to put this thing together hopefully only half a dozen times instead of 20. All right, rails, good dimension, length, everything's good. There's a little bit of defect in there, and right now I have the latitude of deciding what side of these rails is going to be presented. Because when you look at this page 10 drawing, you can see that there are bottom rails, top rails, different dimension, and then the assemblies at the end and in the middle. And so I learned on the beta bench, this one right here, that it's really important to be able to keep track of which of these pieces go where when you're beginning to put the detailed cuts on them. So full speed ahead. I'm gonna mark out the sides that need to be buried, label the pieces, and begin to make some cuts. Okay, we've got the top back, top front, bottom front. And so now it's time to start working on these vertical pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and these guys, the end frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Long ways to go. I don't think I had the camera running, and it doesn't matter, but I have the end frame pieces, the 2 1/4 by 2 3/4 cut with the defect accounted for, and they're right for length, step number 1. But that was a little bit spooky because I'm almost out of 3-inch material, and I would hate to have to try to dig some more nice pieces out of the boards I have left if I got those wrong. But now it's time for the dividers. Inside the bench, it is smaller. And I go to the cut list, and I see that 3 weeks ago I cut 2 by 1.5 inches. Lots of them. There they are. No pressure with these, because if I get 1 or 2 or 3 of those wrong, I've got lots of boards to recut. I don't want to, but it kind of makes me feel a little better. Okay, it's taken me all morning, but I have the pieces for these bents. We're going to call these a front bent and a back bent, and then with frames, intermediate. They're all cut out. They are not all labeled, but they're all cut to length. There's 22 pieces. Anyhow, it's time to start mortising and making lap joints and smoothing that up. We've got just a whole bunch of opportunities to create unnecessary work, but I think if we're careful, we might be all right. Now that I get right down to it, cutting the lap joints in the corners of this bench, bents, as I call them, you know, the main frames, is a little intimidating. I don't want to wreck this oak, and so I've ripped some practice pieces out of fir. Gonna kind of set up the router, set up the jigs, make sure I can make these half laps nice and tight. And let me show you what it looks like inside this bench that I need to accomplish inside the new one. So it's just this half lap joint. There's a half lap that's short, right there, and then a half lap that's longer that comes in here. This mortise came out of here to receive the plywood backer on the lid, and then there are drawer guides and all manner of things down in here. But these are the joints. The difference is this front rail and the back rail are 2 inches tall on this big bench. And so that's going to add kind of a one more step in notching these corners. Got to get it right, so I've got to practice. Could you feel my anxiety going up as I was sort of cutting these to length and getting ready to start cutting the half lap joints in these corners? You know, on the long rails and all the short pieces, half lap, half lap. Well, whether you recognize it or not, I could recognize some uncertainty because I don't want to wreck these boards that I've spent so much time preparing. And as I was laying there last night thinking, how am I going to do this? It hit me, we'll make templates. make templates. It's never the wrong thing to make templates. And so I had some junk, heavy stock around here, the legs that I used on the table that I made for my friend Jeff on the live edge fir slab. And I cut that stuff apart and I made this little representation of the frame. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 different half lap arrangements that occur around the outside of this thing. I feel way better. Now these joints are not furniture quality and I'll do better on this, but at least I know the dimension and the proportions and where the pieces have to fit around each other in awkward ways. See that little step right there on top of this arrangement here was giving me heartburn. But I'm not afraid anymore. And the bonus is, now let me show you right down here on this beta bench. We have dowels through the half lap joints, right? The glue and the dowels are what provides the strength of the connection. But I needed to screw this little template, this test piece together. And so when I do it for real, I'm going to be very careful in the placement of the screws so I can screw my oak frame together before I have to glue and clamp and dowel and commit myself. So I'll be a little more careful on this placement on the oak, but I think I stumbled onto a real advantage. So let me just tell you this. Don't try this without making a full-size template of the joints, so you can be sure that your dado process is going to work, because this is not working good enough, but I'm going to use a router table. So I'm smarter, my confidence is brimming, or at least is adequate, and we are ready to press forward and start cutting these things apart. Now I don't know if it's worrying about the camera, or worrying about the phone calls, or what. But putting this together was harder today than it would have been just 4 or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Just harder to figure these things out. And that's spooky. But I'm going to take a chapter out of Cy Swan's playbook. And just because something is getting harder to do does not mean you can stop trying to do it. Thanks for that, Cy. All right, the rubber's meeting the road. I think I'm ready to start cutting these corner pieces out. All 4 of them are exactly the same, as evidenced by this little template piece. I'm going to mark on here indelibly what they are, mill out the notches, and then move on to the other 3 types of pieces, which are not all exactly the same. So I've got the router set up. It worked beautifully, but it makes that router labor just a little bit to cut out 1 1/4 inches deep, working their way across there. And Ken said, well, why don't you just rough it out with a skill saw? I said, really? I can use a skill saw? No, I didn't. I just said, okay, I'll try it, but it makes me a little nervous. He said, don't be nervous. So I'm going to rough it out and then finish it off with the router. I don't know if that made you nervous, but it made me nervous. made it through the lap joints on the ends of the short pieces. No big deal, right? I mean, this router lift table and a good fence make it very doable. But these longer pieces need the same sorts of joints, and I don't want to, you know, build a jig and put it on there and hold the router and do that. I just don't want to do it. I think I can make it happen on the router table. I've got a dowel down there, raising that end 5/16 of an inch, and I sprayed it with silicone, dry lube. So I mean, this thing goes back and forth without too much trouble. And if I need to move it back and forth in this way, I can. So I've done one of these, it went pretty good. I'm going to swap ends and see if I can do it twice. I don't know if that's better or worse than putting a jig on there with the handheld router and going back and forth. I don't know, but I got her done. I've got 2 more long pieces. That means 4 more lap joints. I think I'm going to stick with it. That bow is going to cause me trouble. Hopefully we can survive it. Well, I just did the cut on this long bottom rail, and it's going to fit just fine. The whole layout, I think, is going to fit just fine. So I'll go ahead and finish up these last 3 outside corner cuts, and then the perimeter bents are roughed in. The next step will be the interior divider bents, pieces, partition. A few more notches, but it begins to kind of clarify, so we're feeling more confident. So what I'm going to try is, I've registered these so that they go back together in a particular way. Everything seems to fit just about right. What I'm betting on is that I can run screw holes through where the dowels are going to go, so screws can hold it together and dry fit. We'll see how that works out. I've got a lot of notching to do. I just can't help myself. I want to see what this looks like as it begins to come together. So I'm a little embarrassed to say that as I have been editing this video, I've heard myself whining a lot about anxiety and uncertainty. And then I see Ken sitting patiently in the background, and I realize how silly my anxieties are, and that compared to so many in this world, I don't actually know what risk or uncertainty or pain is. So in the next video, I'm going to dive into the interior structure of this thing, assembling the carcass, dovetailing the drawer supports in place, and enjoying working with my friend. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.